Welcome to my FPL podcast, and this is the Game Week 11 edition. I'm looking forward to it because it's going to be different to the one we had last week and different to the one we will have next week, just given the landscape slightly vary across the two sets of weeks, just given due to the fixtures, right? So, without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so first we're going to start with captaincy, and I'm going to discuss why my preference is Haaland, and then we're going to touch on the no Haaland camp and where their head should be at. Right, so for me, my preference is Haaland. I think overall, he has the better fixture. Let's just start with the simpler thing. Bournemouth have just had a game against Liverpool midweek in the Cup. That will add to their fatigue. Saturday, 3 o'clock away at the Etihad. It's a long trip up as well. That's obviously has to be a factor. And we've seen how much of an issue this can be for sides within the league. We see it more with the bigger teams due to the Champions League travelling, but naturally it's going to have an effect on all of them. The other thing with Haaland is, now that Grealish is back, I really don't know if Doku can displace him at the moment. We've seen how well Haaland and Grealish play together, and it's because of the way the side interacts with that combination. Grealish retaining the ball and his ability to just control the ball on the left side of the field with Bernardo Silva overlapping or someone inverting and then having two essential in the middle. And the amount of combinations this offers for them to get the ball into the box. Now, this avenue of getting the ball into the box becomes different. With Doku, it's far more direct. It's quicker. It's just he beats his man and it's in. And it's better for the man arriving, hence why Alvarez did so well. But with Grealish, I feel like Alvarez has to tuck in a little bit deeper because there's so much more fluidity in that left half space. And that allows Haaland, who's already in the box, to accumulate better chances. The way the ball circulates, it's just better for him. That's point number one. Point number two is one particular weakness Bournemouth have had, which Haaland is trying to exploit, is the distances between their lines are so big. You rarely see this in the Premier League now. Because the lesser sides, and I mean this with all due respect, compared to the big six, right, are coached very, very well in settled, compact low blocks. But Bournemouth aren't really trying to play this style of football, nor have they. They're willing to give up that amount of control in pursuit of going forward, and I don't think it's worked because I don't think it's been particularly well coached, with all due respect, and you can argue they don't have the players to do it either. But with those spaces, I think Haaland could really exploit them simply from turning them inside out, turning him the other way when he goes in behind, and even the other players, the City players, picking up pockets, and they're so good in the pocket. So I think everything for Haaland is great. I was seeing literally no negatives. Doku starts is a little bit worse, and I think Foden could have a good game. But for me, all positives for Haaland. They'll be hungry to keep going after what he did at Old Trafford. Now, moving on to Salah. Whilst in recent times he's accumulated so many points, I'd say he has been somewhat fortuitous to do so. I would say the goal against Nottingham Forest was a freak goal, and Matt Turner won't want to see that again. He's obviously scored a penalty against Brighton, penalty against Everton, which contributed half of his two braces. And the other goals came in the 97th minute and from a mistake. And I don't think he's actually played particularly well. I think he's probably been a bit wider and reverted back to being more of a creative outlet as opposed to a direct threat he used to be under Klopp, penetrating the half spaces again and again and again. Not to say he won't score goals. Brilliant player, top player, the best right winger in the world, comfortably. But I just don't think his positioning and role at the moment is as good as Haaland. So that's one. Two, I'd say Luton is actually a slightly tougher fixture. I'd rather have Bournemouth at home than Luton away. They actually haven't done too bad at home, and also they've been a bit inconsistent. Sometimes they've had some pretty poor performances. Sometimes they've had some pretty decent performances. I watched them against Everton, and Everton are a better side than people give them credit for. And Salah, I mean, Luton were pretty good. So I can see Luton making it slightly tough. I still expect Liverpool to win fairly convincingly, but I think in a situation when the margins are so tight, you have to look for edges, and I think it was Haaland. Now, to touch on the no Haaland camp, I think if you've already committed, unless you're in an extremely luxurious position, you commit to staying with no Haaland. The reason being is they've got Chelsea next, right? And Chelsea's not an easy fixture. Chelsea's side is tailor-made for making the bigger teams frustrated in bigger games. Like, the press is good. Pochettino's a very good manager of the press. He showcased that against Arsenal. Side of the defensive qualities individually and as a system. So, and we saw this even last season. Chelsea struggled a lot last season, but Haaland, when he went to Stamford Bridge, struggled because of the manner of like how the players interact with this certain game state. So I think you have the advantage next week. Try and take it on the chin this week. I don't think it's going to end well for you. I think over the grand scheme of things, you should be fine. Now, if you can get him for a -4 and by only selling Trippier, maybe another asset, then yeah, sure, you do it. But for me, a -8 would probably be taking a bit too much, and I think you just have to have a bit of faith in Salah captain and the rest of your team. Moving on. Last week, I spoke to you about how I don't think Ollie Watkins is essential, and I'm going to do that again. It was prompted by a friend who's on a wild card, which most of us were on wild card 10 or 8, but he was on a wild card, and I was trying to convince him that for his team, the best structure would be to leave Watkins out and go for Nunes. Now, there's a 0.9 million price difference, and in a season like this, where the pricing's so compact, it's a big deal, right? It's a big deal. And I honestly think Nunes can at least go punch for punch with Watkins. I'd argue over the next, maybe let's say the medium term, he has better fixtures. I'd argue he's honestly in better form from what I've seen. Now, I know you're going to say, okay, he hauled against West Ham, the 23 Brighton. I still call the 23-pointer against Brighton an anomaly. So I'm going to kind of discard that. And yes, the goal was fantastically well taken against West Ham. But I think Nunes from open play generates more threat just from his chaotic nature, his ability to move in behind, his physical traits. And like I said, with the fixtures and him being slightly cheaper, I think that 0.9 can be used elsewhere to facilitate your squad in other places and then allow you to have a better all-round squad. So by no means am I saying that Watkins is a bad asset. He's probably still the second best forward in the game. I just think the gap between these two is closing quite significantly and quite quickly. And I think Nunes could be your alternative to Watkins to facilitate elsewhere. Not really much difference. You consider if these stats were adjusted to per minutes, right? Like they've had 11 and 10 big chances, but Nunes probably had half his minutes. So I'm really bullish on Darwin Nunes, and he looks great. And I do think the fixtures are probably better for him. So for me, this move makes a lot of sense. Now, would I sell Watkins to Nunes? Only if you need to upgrade elsewhere, but he has the better fixture this week. Next week, you'd probably go Watkins' way, but I have a lot of faith in Nunes. Okay, now this is probably the topic of the week, right? The cheap midfielders. Now, there's one person missing from here who, naturally, I can only fit 5 on, and he's a bit more expensive than the rest, and that is Eberechi Eze. Now, Roy Hodgson has said that he will be in the squad at Burnley, and there is even a chance he starts. That is huge news, because at 6-1, with the fixtures he's got in the next 4, that becomes the best cheap midfielder comfortably, right? And he would most certainly be worth paying an extra $1 million over some of these guys. So if you want to take that gamble that he starts, I really don't think it's a bad idea. But moving on to these guys, it's tough. It's really tough because they all have their positives. Ayew has the best set of fixtures, but now with Eze back, I think if you're going to go Ayew, you may as well go Eze, even if Eze were to be benched this week, so we can kind of discount him. I know what people will say about Douglas Luiz. He has the fixtures. He has the form. He's been getting the points. But for me, the role he plays, I just don't think this is sustainable. I think eventually, and we will start, and it's going to occur now, I think we're going to start to see a decline in the level of returns. We've seen this so many times with FPL assets in the past. Almiron last season, probably an extreme but good example. And I just don't think Douglas Luiz can at least sustain this level. I think the other 3 guys on the screen that I haven't mentioned, Gordon, Hwang, and Palmer, are just, they've got far better goal threat, penalties excluded, but Palmer has penalties. Hwang may have them as well. So honestly, I think if you've had him so far and you've got your points, I would take it and run to the bank. I think you've done great, but I would play slightly more, I'd argue, with the players who are just playing further up the pitch. Right, now moving on to these 3 where it becomes a bit more difficult. I think Gordon's going to start pretty much every game. His expected minutes looks great, and he really looks like he's a player who has fantastic sustainability within the squads. He doesn't really look like he needs rest. So I think from that aspect, he's great. Palmer, the only reason I place him 3rd out of these 3 is because of fixtures. But if you do pick him, I would just keep him for the long term, because when the fixtures turn, he's going to be a fantastic asset, assuming Nkunku doesn't take his place. And with penalties at 5 million, you can't ask for much more. So if you're going to buy him, just know that it's a long-term move, and I guess you're saving yourself some transfers down the line. I would put him 3rd, Gordon 2nd, and my preference would be Hwang. I think he's looked really good compared to last season. I'm a big fan of Gary O'Neill. I think he's doing a fantastic job. I think Wolves look so much better. Naturally, the injury to Pedro Neto is a big deal, but I'm offsetting that with the fact that Wolves now turn in terms of their fixtures, and hopefully those two kind of balance each other's out in terms of utility as 2 variables. So I like Hwang, and he genuinely looked like he's got a goal in him. Going for him. In terms of the tactical adjustment as opposed to Neto going out, I think the fullbacks will take a brunt of that, and they will be used as slightly more of a creative outlet to reduce the need for everyone else to in the forward line to fill in for Neto. But in terms of goals, I think they're fine. I think more it's stuff like progressive carries and pocket play as opposed to where you're really going to miss Neto. But I think the fullback's going to do the first, and in terms of the second, I imagine a slight system alteration. And I would pick Aït-Nouri for those injuries. I think the expected minutes are slightly safer if O'Neill reverts to a back three with wing backs, and Doherty could get a look in that. So I would go Hwang if I had to choose. Right, now moving on to defenders. I've obviously spoke about Aït-Nouri there when I spoke about Wolves. But I would keep Gabriel. I think if you're trying to play really aggressive, then yeah, sure, you can sell him for Tsimikas, Nori. You could sell him for anyone on the screen, but probably Tsimikas and Aït-Nouri for the higher ceilings. But Palace, Liverpool, and Wolves all have good fixtures, right? And if you have a burn, or if you're looking to downgrade Trippier to upgrade elsewhere, then I think these guys are all fantastic options. If I had to rank them, I'd probably go Tsimikas, Aït-Nouri, Mitchell, Guéhi. I know Guéhi's better on the bonus point system, but Mitchell is more likely to get an assist, and I think I'd rather take that minimal extra amount of upside. But with Gabriel, I'm not really concerned as an owner because, yes, he got rested / dropped against Sheffield United, but it made sense in hindsight because it was a good game to rest him in a game where Kiwior can play, and he improves the speed of ball circulation, the progression. He's better on the ball, so that would make sense to me. But does Gabriel start Newcastle? I'm very confident he does. Burnley at home, they're actually a bit better going forward than people give them credit for, so I can imagine that being a bit of a toss-up. But after that, 13-14, I expect them to start. So is this the most efficient use of the transfer? Well, you have to weigh up your team. If you've got 2 frees and quite literally nothing else to do and upgrade, then yeah, go Gabriel to Tsimikas or go Gabriel to Aït-Nouri in pursuit of the upside. But I would say, like, if it's not a pressing matter and you have other things or a transfer will be useful down the line, then you can keep him. Because remember, Gabriel does have really good upside. Because the system Arteta plays has a strong element of pragmatism to it. It has a strong element of control to it. The 4-4-2 press off the ball is a Champions League tailored, successful press. We saw that against Manchester United amongst anyone else. We've seen that in the Community Shield against City. We've seen that in the Premier League against City. They are a very, very difficult side to break down when they want to be. Incredibly difficult. So clean sheets should arrive. And obviously he's a massive threat in the opposition box. For those 15 pointers, they're certainly accessible. So I would just think about that before selling him after just one bad week. And you've also had a bad experience with him at the start, so I wouldn't let that taint your vision. Second to last, Diego Jota. Now, Luis Diaz is in training. I just think that, like, for someone who wanted a 1 week punt, and I purely put this here for someone who wanted a 1 week punt, I'm not sure Diaz starts. And I think Jota, with that type of heat map against Forest's low block, you can imagine a very similar one against Luton. And I think he's actually looked quite sharp recently. I think there could be a haul there. But this is purely for someone who wanted a 1 week punt. I was asked to put this in, so I did. So I would go Jota if I had to pick one. And lastly, these 2 assets. Now, I think they're both very simple. Jared Bowen, for me, is gone. At 7.2, with the fixtures he's got coming up, with the potential to play 9, with the avenues to points, with how good he is, with his away record, I just wouldn't sell him. If anything, I'd buy him. I think he's such a good asset in terms of the value for money you're getting. And for me, he's just a set and forget. He'll tick along very nicely. He'll get hauls here and there. He'll accumulate points fairly regularly. This West Ham side really, really do need him. And he's integral to them in the final third. So for me, fantastic. Now, with Mbeumo, I would say this is a case of don't buy, don't sell. I think this week, without Paqueta and Alvarez in the West Ham side, you could probably see them reverting to a slightly more defensive structure. I wouldn't be surprised to see them play a back 3, maybe. And as such, I think Mbeumo's appeal is volatile, right? They play a back 4 and they appear very open. You think Mbeumo can do well, but the opposite could also happen. So I would say don't buy him because he's got Liverpool and Arsenal next. Even this might not be that good of a fixture, but I would certainly keep him and just kind of reassess next week. If he hauls again, you probably have to keep him against Liverpool away. Maybe you keep him against Liverpool away anyway, because they'll give you a chance. So that's something to monitor, but I don't think it's a pressing matter. Don't buy, don't sell. And that wraps it up. So if you could please like and subscribe, we would all be very grateful, especially myself. Make sure to download the app. Make sure to follow Fantasy Football Hub and myself at FPL_Jian Batra and at FFH_HQ on Twitter. If you could rate the podcast, that would be fantastic as well. And join our Discord. So yeah, any likes and subscribes and comments would be greatly appreciated. And the app is there with 30% off and a 7-day free trial. I really enjoyed that, and I'm really looking forward to the game week 12 one, where we'll have numerous dilemmas that I can get into. But until then, have a fantastic weekend. I wish you the best of luck with your green arrows, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.